Hello, everyone. I'm glad you could join us. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we have some slides to move us through this time together. So can I just get a thumbs up if we see the slides? Thumbs up. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So we look forward to sharing more about the Climate Beneficial Fiber Partnership. We're so glad that y'all were able to join us. And you're encouraged as we go along to drop any questions that you have in the chat. And then we'll also be reserving a few minutes after each presenter's section to have a live question and answer. Just a reminder that this is being recorded and this will be posted publicly on NCAT's YouTube page, NCAT ATRA YouTube page. But we will be able to slice out the question and answers if y'all would prefer to just have this be the informational only, and have the question and answers be more private just between us in this conversation. So I'm Elise Hashke. I'm a senior manager at the National Center for Appropriate Technology, and I'm also a partnership project manager. We've got a great lineup of speakers planned today, so I'm just going to take a few minutes here at the top to draw some broad contextual brushstrokes before my colleagues paint a more detailed picture of how this program is going to roll out in the Northern Great Plains. So let's see here. Advance my slide. Okay. So for starters, this program is the Climate Beneficial Fiber Partnership. It's funded by the USDA Partnerships for Climate-Smart Commodities initiative. This is a new USDA initiative, and it is promoting American-made food, feed, fiber, and forestry products that use climate-smart practices. A climate-smart commodity for this project is defined as any raw agricultural product that is grown using practices which reduce greenhouse gases or sequester carbon. Through this project, USDA is investing $3.1 billion in U.S. farmers, ranchers, and foresters through 141 pilot projects. And these pilot projects all serve the same intention of supporting producers to adopt climate-smart conservation practices, to pursue cost-effective methods to quantify, monitor, and report on the greenhouse gas benefit of these practices, and to develop new markets and expand existing markets for climate-smart commodities. I just wanted to pull out a few notes here. This is a very detailed program, and there's lots of information that you can find online. Of course, we're here to answer questions as they come up. But a few things I wanted to pull out and really highlight today is that this is an NRCS program. However, it is funded through the Commodity Credit Corporation, which means a couple things. One is that we do need to adhere to certain NRCS guidelines and requirements. Examples being program eligibility, which needs to be determined by FSA documentation. And we'll be hearing more about that later on in this webinar. We'll also need to be adhering to NRCS practice standards and specifications. So that is what the technical assistance providers and conservation planners will be supporting producers to achieve through this project. And then we've decided that we'll be following the NRCS cost share payment rates, the state-specific cost share payment rates through this project. And that is how direct payments to producers will be made. Because it is not funded through the Farm Bill, there are a few flexibilities that we have here. One is that the adjusted gross income limitation of $900,000 that is applied to NRCS programs does not apply to this program. Also, the payments that are made through this project do not count towards the NRCS EQIP payment caps. So it's a separate program funded separately. So we have some of those nice kind of deviations from typical NRCS rules and regs. Really want to underscore that this initiative is not a federal carbon marketplace. USDA will not be generating, issuing, verifying, selling, or retiring carbon credits through this project. So I know that we've gotten a lot of questions about that across the partnership project. So I just wanted to make that very clear. That is not what USDA is doing. That is not what our project is doing. Okay. So this steps us into the Climate Beneficial Fiber Partnership. And this is a group of 6 partner organizations who saw this investment as an opportunity to leverage investment for fiber production specifically. And with fiber producers who we knew in our communities to already be building soil health and pursuing premium markets. So through this partnership, we'll be able to support wool growers and cotton farmers with technical assistance and financial assistance to adopt conservation ag practices and to access premium markets. So this project is being led by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, along with our 5 partner organizations. And you can see all of the partner logos here on the right, but I'll go ahead and read them out. These are very valued partners in this project. So Carbon Cycle Institute and Fibershed will be working with cotton growers and wool growers in California. New York Textile Lab will be working with wool growers in New York. And Seed to Shirt will be working with cotton growers in the Southeast. There are a lot of other elements to this project that each of the partners are bringing to the table, but I'm speaking specifically to the producer reach that this project will have. And then through March 31st of 2028, this project will allow us to invest $18 million in 100 producers who will ultimately be enrolled in this project. Almost all of that money will be paid as direct cost share payments to producers for implementing practices. This project specifically is designed to cultivate relationships, meaningful and long-term assistance relationships with producers, relationships that endure beyond the life of this project. And so as such, part of the design is that the backbone of this project is a high-quality carbon farm planning conservation framework. This was developed by Carbon Cycle Institute. And here to share more about this planning process, we have Dr. Jeff Creek, who is Director of Rangeland and Agroecosystem Management at Carbon Cycle Institute, and Lynette Niebrugge, who is the Associate Director of Education and Training. In addition to that conservation planning framework that we're bringing to the table, we're also developing supply chains and market demand through a climate beneficial verification program, which Rachel Kastner, who is the brand engagement manager at Fibershed, will be speaking more about in this webinar. Lastly, just want to underscore that this project specifically is not affiliated with any carbon market. We are not generating, issuing, trading, or retiring tons of metric carbon through this, and we are not making payments based on tons of carbon stored through these practices that will be implemented. That brings us up into the Northern Great Plains, which we're really excited that we have the opportunity to aim and direct support towards wool growers in the Northern Great Plains and uplift the wool growing community. We have a team of NCAT conservation planners who are hired and trained and ready to start providing participating wool growers with that tailored planning assistance in order to implement practices that will meet your needs and your goals while also building resilient agroecosystems. Through this team in the Northern Great Plains, we'll be serving the states of Montana, Wyoming, and South Dakota. And here to share more about that effort is the NCAT team, Danielle Dunai, Allison Cooley-Agee, and Alicia Horak. They will be providing that tailored planning technical assistance while bringing more carbon into healthy soils, grasses, and wool fibers. We will also be cultivating peer-to-peer learning communities and really elevating the producer voice through workshops and coordinated events. And then we'll be opening new market channels for climate beneficial verified wool. The last thing I'll say, and I'm going to pass the microphone, is that by virtue of being within NCAT's network in the Northern Great Plains, you're part of a larger organization now that has a plethora of resources, online resources, a weekly podcast, and a network of comprehensive agricultural specialists who are here to answer any question that could possibly come up. We have I believe we're up to now 40 agricultural specialists across NCAT who serve the entire nation. So it is it's a pretty robust group to be tapped into. And with that, I will pass the microphone to Alona Wild so she can introduce herself.
Thanks, Elise. Hello, everybody. Thank you all for coming. And actually, Elise, could you share your screen again? And I'll just, if you could just push up that next slide.
Yeah.
Thank you. But my name is Alona Wild. I just wanted to give a quick just intro and introduce myself. I know you all have probably gotten some emails from me. I'm usually having to follow up and do a lot of our tedious record keeping and USDA requirements. So sorry in advance for that. But I wanted to give just a quick update, just kind of let you know a little bit more about NCAT and me. Again, I am based actually in Butte, Montana. I'm here headquartered at NCAT's building. We have not only our headquarters here, we also have field offices across the country. And we've been working in a sustainable ag and renewable energy, working in that field since 1976. So we have quite a few different government and USDA funded programs that we're working on. A big one Elise touched on is ATRA and our sustainable agriculture. So that's another, if you haven't really researched that or heard that much about it, feel free to ask us. And I put on that email website. We also have a hotline if you have any questions about that. But just wanted to give a face to the name and just say hello and please reach out. I man our partnerships at ncat.org email address. So if you email that, I field all those queries and yeah, I'm looking forward to working with you all. And yeah, thank you all.
Thank you. And with that, we will introduce Lynette.
Hello, I'm Lynette Nieberge with Carbon Cycle Institute. And today we will be presenting on carbon farm planning, the process of carbon farm planning, a little bit of background about who we are, CCI, and a little bit about how we got started and really introducing carbon farming towards a climate beneficial agriculture. As you can see here, I'll introduce Jeff in a second, but as you can see here, this is our mission as Carbon Cycle Institute. We're really focused on advancing our mission through agriculture and carbon programs, which is advancing carbon farming and regenerative rangeland management to build soil and carbon and critical ecosystem services on ranches, farms, and working lands. Carbon Cycle Institute we've been around for over 10 years, really building this framework and backed by research and science. I am going to pass it off to Jeff, Dr. Jeff Creek, who's the founder of the Carbon Cycle Institute, and he will kick off our presentation. Jeff?
Hey, thanks, Lynette. And thanks everybody for joining us this evening. Maybe to the next slide, Lynette. So I think everybody's aware that we're witnessing rising carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, as this graph clearly shows. But what we often are not quite as aware of is the fact that our land management practices have historically contributed about a third of the surplus carbon dioxide that we are seeing in the atmosphere today. And so this inset graph you see is work done by Sanderman and others back in 2017, showing the effect of the loss of carbon from our soils and our working land soils and rangeland soils over the last couple thousand years. And as you can see, the trajectory of loss of carbon from our soils is shown in the sort of mauve and green colors there. Parallels are increasing carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. So we have the opportunity, what this really tells us is that we have the opportunity to return at least a third of that surplus CO2 in the atmosphere back into our working lands and harvest the benefits of doing so, which is really our goal with the whole concept of carbon farming, is to, yes, reduce carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, but perhaps more importantly, to support agriculture through the reintroduction or the recarbonization, if you will, of our soils. I think probably the next slide. Yeah. So with that in mind, back in the early 2000s, a group of us in Marin County, which is a coastal county just north of San Francisco, in California, we came together with some researchers out of UC Berkeley and really asked this question, could land management increase soil carbon? Now, I'd been farming organically at that point for over 25 years, and I knew I could increase soil organic matter through management, but I'd never actually quantified that process. And that was really what we were after, was could we bring the requisite science to bear and actually demonstrate and quantify carbon increases as a result of, in response to a management practice. And so, again, engaging Dr. Wendy Silver, a biogeochemist out of the University of California, Berkeley, and her graduate students and postdoctorate students, we set about trying to measure an increase in soil carbon in response to a management activity. And the activity we chose was to simply apply some compost to the surface of grazed grasslands in a couple of different sites in California, one coastal site and one in the Sierra foothills. And then we went back and looked to see if we could actually measure a change. So we put 1/2 inch of compost on the ground, and over the next 4 years, Becca Riles, now Dr. Becca Riles at UC Merced, conducted her doctoral research on what happened next. One of the first things we saw, as you can see on the image on the right, was that the cows were gravitating to the compost-treated plots. And that was kind of humorous to see and interesting. And when we analyzed the forage, in fact, we found higher protein in the compost-treated plots, which was perhaps not entirely surprising, but it was interesting to observe. Perhaps most importantly, we saw an increase in soil carbon, and we were able to measure that increase. Now, in year one, that was kind of a no-brainer. We've added some carbon. We're measuring that additional carbon. So that was not a huge surprise, although we were glad that we were able to verify that we could measure the change. But what we saw in subsequent years was that the carbon levels in the soil continued to rise, even though we added no additional compost. And the message, the take-home message, in the next slide, if you would, Lynette. The take-home message is really shown on the right, the image on the right. What we saw was in response to a single compost addition to the system, the system itself, the rangeland ecosystem itself, began to photosynthesize at a more rapid rate. In other words, we began to draw more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into the soil and into the vegetation. So to explain this graph on the right, what you see in that hockey stick black line is the compost carbon going on in year one, big slug of carbon, if you will, going into the system. But then that compost decays rather rapidly over the next few decades. It essentially returns to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. But the ecosystem response is what was really quite surprising to all of us, was that as the vegetation responds to that enhanced the nutrients from the compost, the enhanced water holding capacity in the soil in response to that increased soil organic matter, the system begins to draw down more carbon dioxide. In other words, there's more production happening on that rangeland system. And some of that carbon is ending up in the soil as soil organic matter. So what we saw was that by adding some compost, some carbon, some additional energy, if you will, in the system, we were able to initiate a positive feedback where every year now we have 10 years of data showing a steady increase in carbon in the system in response to that one-time application of compost. So this was fairly profound, and it led us to understand that we could, by increasing soil organic carbon, increase the system's capacity for additional carbon capture from the atmosphere with positive impacts on the productivity of the pasture system. So clearly, we confirmed our hypothesis that land management could increase soil carbon and that it could do so at the expense of atmospheric carbon. That is, through the photosynthetic capture of carbon dioxide, we could build farm system carbon. This led us to this great understanding, really a profound understanding, that we could, in fact, reverse the unintentional industrial forcing of atmospheric carbon with the intentional agricultural forcing of soil organic carbon. And that's the graph on the left, showing this hypothetical potential of agriculture to actually be a climate solution. Next slide, please. So naturally, as we thought about this, we talked about this with our local producers. Everyone got very excited about compost, but the reality is that there are many ways to increase carbon capture on working lands, of course. And so carbon farming evolved out of this understanding that we could manage our farm systems to increase the rate at which carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere and then converted to plant production or plant matter, and most importantly, soil organic matter. So carbon farming is really the process of engaging agriculture as a climate solution through the beneficial transfer of atmospheric carbon to our working land soils and vegetation. Next slide, please. Now, fundamentally, I think we can all recognize that actually all farming is carbon farming, because farming doesn't happen without photosynthesis. Farming is totally dependent on atmospheric carbon to create the products of agriculture. But what we have come to understand is that the way we farm, our farming practices, the way we design our farm operations, can lead to very different amounts of carbon, both captured and held by our farm systems. And that's really the challenge of carbon farming, is to manage our systems in a way that actually results in a net increase in carbon in the farm system. Next slide, please. So the idea with carbon farm planning, essentially, we've taken a page out of the NRCS conservation planning process, but we're really focusing on carbon and the carbon cycle and the capacity to capture carbon as the organizing principle around which we build the farm plan. We are definitely not promoting a carbon marketing scheme, which I think Elise made very clear. But in developing a carbon farm plan, we hope to support producers in accessing carbon markets if and when those opportunities arise. And that really is how we're viewing this, the USDA Climate-Smart Commodity Program, is really trying to set up American producers to access global carbon markets if and as they emerge. But most importantly, is to recognize the role of carbon in our farm systems and how capturing and holding more carbon in our farm systems actually benefits farm production, farm resilience over time. So that's really the primary goal here. Next slide, please. So USDA came out a few years ago as we were moving the carbon farm planning process forward. NRCS stepped up and developed a carbon planning guidance. And this is basically directly from them, viewing a carbon farm plan as a whole farm conservation plan that, when implemented, will enhance soil health, increase carbon sequestration, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This plan is ultimately developed in close collaboration between the planner and the farmer. And the plan then is really developed around resource concerns that the producer has, while focusing on the opportunities for carbon sequestration across the farm landscape. Next slide, please. So this particular program, as Elise has outlined, is really an effort to expand markets for US-made climate-smart commodities. The project, as we're conceiving of it, obviously is providing technical assistance to producers to implement climate-smart production practices on a voluntary basis, completely on a voluntary basis on our working lands. And that's really where NCAT, the USDA funding, your local planners, and we at the Carbon Cycle Institute are stepping in to provide that technical and financial assistance. Obviously, the goal is to pilot innovative and cost-effective methods for quantifying, monitoring, reporting, and verifying greenhouse gas benefits. And that's really what the carbon farm planning process, the role of the carbon farm planning process in this context is to provide that quantification, monitoring, reporting, and verification framework. And then ultimately, the goal of developing markets and promoting those resulting climate-smart commodities is really where Fibershed is coming in with its concept of climate beneficial fibers. Next slide, please. So we've been working at this, as Lynette said, for over 10 years now, starting at the farm scale, developing carbon farm plans for a few of our local producers here in Marin County, and then gradually developing county level plans, engaging with local climate action plans. Across California now, we have multiple hubs, which are basically groups of resource conservation districts coming together to develop carbon farm programs. And of course, now with USDA Climate-Smart Commodities program, we're looking nationally and even internationally at expanding this work. Next slide. This has been interesting to watch over the last few years. As you can see in these two images from 1920 to 1924, I'm sorry, 2020 to 2024, we see a pretty significant expansion in healthy soils legislation across the country. And this seems to be just happening very rapidly. I think it's just a matter of time before we see virtually every state in the country having some kind of soil-focused, healthy soil-focused program, which ultimately, when we talk about healthy soils, we're really talking about biologically rich, carbon-rich, energy-rich soils. So it has been very gratifying to watch this evolution over time. Next slide. Specifically speaking for the Northern Great Plains, this quote, this is from an earlier Conference of Parties meeting in Bonn, Germany back in 2017, but the comment was made that agriculture is really more exposed to climate change impacts than any other economic sector. And that's really true when you think about it, how much and how dependent we are within the context of agriculture on reasonably predictable weather patterns, for example, reasonably predictable first and last frost dates, rainfall regimes, all of these things that allow us to plan ahead and think about how we're going to manage our systems throughout the coming year or coming years. And as climate begins to change radically, we begin to see it becoming more and more difficult to anticipate changes that are coming our way. So specifically for the Northern Great Plains, the 5th National Climate Assessment has highlighted these climate impacts. And I think you've probably all experienced these with increased extreme temperatures, drought, heavy rainfall when rainfall does come. It tends to be in more intense storms. We're certainly experiencing that in California. Higher winds, and accompanying all of this is increased pest and disease pressure as things get a little bit out of the normal realm. So again, when we think about building resilience into our farm systems through building their soil organic matter and ecosystem carbon, we're really looking at building resilience in the face of these increasing unexpected impacts. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, our historical land management has indeed led to significant losses of organic carbon from our farm systems. And this in turn has led to losses of biodiversity and ecosystem function across the globe. Obviously, soil erosion, very visible here, wind erosion. But what we're I think, less aware of at the local level, because we don't necessarily think about this at the global scale, is the loss of capacity of the biosphere to actually draw down carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. So the graph on the right shows the decline in the amount of plant biomass, photosynthesizing plant biomass on the planet over the last couple thousand years. Again, because of human activity that has cut down forests, degraded grasslands, and so forth. So we have not only put large quantities of additional carbon into the atmosphere, about a third of which has come from our soils and landscapes, but we've also degraded the capacity of our ecosystems to absorb that CO2 through photosynthesis by eliminating a large percentage of our standing biomass stocks globally. So we're essentially burning the candle at both ends, and that's my attempt to be clever here with this image. But the opportunity this presents to us is to reverse this trend by recarbonizing the agricultural landscape. So next slide, please. Now, there are a lot of parallel movements, I think, happening globally right now, and you I'm sure have come across most, if not all, of these terms: regenerative agriculture, sustainable agriculture, conservation agriculture, sustainable land management, holistic management, organic farming, and agroecology. What these all have in common is that in order to be successful as an approach to agriculture, they all depend on the increased capture of solar energy by the farm system in the form of organic carbon. And so we elected to describe our process, or the process we're promoting, as carbon farming, because it explicitly calls out the fact that what we're talking about is enhancing the drawdown of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and transforming it into soil organic matter and the products of agriculture. So just to be very explicit about what it is that we're actually engaged in here at the global scale and the farm scale. Next slide. So again, we're talking about the carbon cycle, the process of photosynthesis by which solar radiation, solar energy, is transformed into the biochemical energy which epitomizes or makes up our agricultural products. So clearly, when we talk about carbon and enhancing the carbon in our farm systems, we're talking about enhancing the amount of energy coming into those farm systems. And that energy then can be utilized to drive all the processes on farm, right? So carbon really can be seen as and understood as the energy currency of all living systems, including our farm systems and all our farm system processes and farm products. As you can see from this image, the carbon cycle is a huge global cycle. Carbon moves among various carbon pools from the atmosphere to the oceans, into vegetation. Of course, it's stored in fossil fuels, and our burning of those fuels moves that carbon into the atmosphere. The oceans absorb much of that, but not all of it. And then we say, well, where could we put this material beneficially? Where could we park our atmospheric carbon beneficially? And we look to our soils as a great reservoir, third largest reservoir of carbon on the planet, and more carbon than is held in the atmosphere and vegetation combined. And by increasing soil organic carbon, we begin to see all kinds of positive things happening. Next slide, please. So again, recarbonizing the biosphere, managing the flow of solar energy through our farm systems. We can utilize that solar radiation to support plant growth, which then feeds the soils and feeds the entire farm ecosystem. Next slide. So we have a choice in our farming systems to either farm in a way that results in losses of fertility and losses of energy from our farm systems, as demonstrated here, or next slide. And this is a kind of a graphic example of a farm system in our neck of the woods here in California that suffered a long history of what we might say overuse, resulting in the downcutting of this riparian system and the dewatering of this historically wet meadow, and undermining the farm operations resilience to disturbance such as floods and drought, and undermining the long-term economic viability of this farm landscape. But then in the next slide, we see the opportunity for improving system carbon, improving system energy, and initiating what we might view as an upward spiral of soil improvement and all of the co-benefits that come along with that. Next slide, please. And this is the same farm operation 20 years later, following a riparian restoration effort on the part of the Resource Conservation District, engaging planting of hedgerows and windbreaks, managing the grazing, bringing the grazing under rational control. And you can see we can begin to put some carbon values on this based on the various tools we're using in the carbon farm planning process. And you can begin to imagine the implications for the productivity of this farm system. Next slide. The hydrological impacts of increasing soil organic carbon are significant. In fact, it turns out that the loss of soil carbon from our soils historically is equivalent to essentially the drought impacts of, or the impacts of the hydrological impacts of drought. So because of our historical losses of carbon, our drought, what the impacts we suffer from drought are essentially doubled over what they would be if we had maintained our soil organic matter. And so again, the potential is there to restore soil organic matter and build soil water holding capacity, including groundwater recharge. And all of this is really driven by our capacity to draw down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and use that CO2 to build soil organic matter, driving denser root systems, increasing soil aggregation, improving soil structure, decreasing soil bulk density, and enhancing water infiltration, including groundwater recharge. Next slide. So some key functions of soil organic carbon. I'm sure most of you are aware that organic matter supplies nutrients. It can actually prevent or minimize leaching of nutrients that are added in synthetic form, increasing available water holding capacity, contributing to soil aggregation, infiltration, and of course, sequestering carbon. So again, providing energy to support soil processes and overall ecosystem biodiversity, productivity, and what we might call soil health. So monitoring our trends in soil organic carbon can then reflect trends in all of these soil factors and ecosystem processes. Next slide. So I'm going to pass this back to Lynette, and she'll give you an intro into what is actually carbon farm planning. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. That was really great. I hope all of you enjoyed that as much as I did. It never gets old listening to Jeff go through that information. So a lot of you are debating on, is this program right for you, and still thinking about what actually is carbon farm planning. The way I view it is that carbon farm planning is really a creative exercise, which will really help you think about all opportunities on your farmscape to increase that carbon sequestration, decrease greenhouse gas emissions. Oftentimes, these carbon farm plans are a vehicle for increasing carbon cycle literacy among producers and technical assistance providers, building that climate and soil health expertise programs within our conservation districts nationally. And it's a roadmap of climate mitigation opportunities in a whole farm or ranch or regional framework, thinking about that scaling up graphic that Jeff showed. But really, a successful carbon farm plan really cultivates carbon farmers. So getting into what are the elements of a carbon farm plan in this whole planning process? Right here, we really look at all the different components, but to me, the most important component is really the producer engagement, where the technical assistant really engages with the producer, learns what that landscape is, learns about the goals and management of the producer, really thinking about what is happening and functioning on that landscape, and being able to work long-term with producers. So yourselves in this process, we can really then become an advisor to folks out there thinking about entering in a program like this. One of the components of the planning process is being able to go out on the landscape for field visits, to do a full assessment of understanding what the management is, what the ecological considerations are, and developing site-specific practice recommendations. And then through the inventory and analysis, being able to map out and really think about what all of those climate beneficial practices are by mapping them, obtaining the dimensions, and then quantifying them. So then we can come back and talk to the producers yourselves about deciding what actually is something feasible for you all to implement on your landscape, how that could benefit you, how that meets your goals, and then really thinking about setting out a timeline for implementation, both short and long term. One thing about these carbon farm plans is that we like to do a whole farm system approach and think about what that landscape could look like in 20 years from now. So when I said that it's a creative process, it's really thinking about all of the opportunities and being able to quantify those into a plan. So although we're planning for 20 years in advance, we are taking our timeline to really scale it down to what is achievable for you to actually implement near term in the next year to 5 years. So you might be asking, what are some of these climate beneficial or carbon farming practices that you might see in a carbon farm plan? As Jeff said, this is nothing new to any of you as a farmer or a rancher. Basically, we use the NRCS framework. We use all of the conservation practices. So we're aligned with other organizations nationally to deploy this thought process. So something that you might see in a carbon farm plan is planning out cover crops throughout your farm area, thinking about prescribed grazing, diving into what prescriptive grazing might be or holistic grazing, planning for windbreaks, hedgerows, silvopastures, organic matter amendments, which could be compost application if you so choose, and then reducing tillage or going to no-till. So these are just a short, like a small suite of practices that could be applicable to someone's landscape. But it doesn't mean that all of these practices would be implemented or would be planned out in your carbon farm plan or ranch plan, whichever you guys choose to call it. But these are just a subset of a suite of practices. And really, these plans are highly influenced by the communication between the planner and the producer and your landscape. After we figure out what practices are applicable for your landscape, we're able to use Comet Planner to quantify those. And we use this method, which is through the Quantification Greenhouse Gas Flux and Agriculture Forestry Blue Book through the USDA. And we're able to quantify what that impact is on your farm. One of the things that when we started doing this work back in 2013, when we started coming up with the carbon farm planning framework, we worked with Colorado State University to develop Comet Planner. So based on our very first 3 carbon farm plans that Jeff and I wrote, we were feeding information to Colorado State for the development of Comet Planner. And now today, Comet Planner is a national tool used by many people for the planning process. They also have other tools like Comet Farm. We do also use local and peer-reviewed data if it's site-specific. We do sometimes utilize that in the carbon farm plans. But the main thing is to be very transparent through these carbon farm plans, so folks can really understand where the data is coming from. And then this slide right here, I compiled for y'all to kind of see some of the components of a carbon farm plan. This plan was written by a technical assistant provider out of one of the conservation districts locally. And this farmer is actually a part of the Climate Beneficial Program here in California. They're in one of our wool pools. So starting out here, we're able to really see what their goals and objectives are. And the plan was really highly influenced by this producer's goals. And then in this second line here, I put in the table of contents. Hopefully you guys can see this. It's really tiny, but this plan is not really that different from any type of conservation or ranch plan that you might already have, or maybe you don't have, and it actually could be very beneficial for you. So it basically goes through the ranch background, your goals and objectives. It highlights resource concerns, and that it is an NRCS terminology of looking at soil, animals, air, plants. And then this specific plan has a whole entire section on grazing protocols, grazing management, a grazing management plan, because this producer really wanted to understand how they could better utilize their system and enhance their grazing management. So we did write a grazing plan for this specific producer. We highlighted agroforestry systems, which meant we were highlighting areas where we could implement silvopasture, hedgerows, windbreaks, and really restore some of the riparian systems. And we focused a lot on this because that was actually something the producer was very interested in us looking at, because they do have some major streams going through, and they live along the Sacramento River. And so they have a lot of erosion happening, and they really wanted to make sure that they were able to see what types of implementation they could do to address those concerns. They do have compost application. We did look into that, and we were and figure out where on the landscape compost could be applied. And then also looking at their hay fields and vineyard systems to see if there's any enhancements that could occur there. And then down here, we're able to put in a summary of all the carbon farming practices, and we were able to quantify the soil, water, and carbon. So understanding what that water holding capacity would be on this farm if all of these practices were implemented throughout time. And then the plans also include maybe funding for the future, future funding of any implementation work, also monitoring and a short-term action plan. And then over here on the right, the table is just highlighting all of the conservation practices of which are in this carbon farm plan, a short description, the annual CO2e sequestered in metric tons per practice, and then what those benefits are, and then what tool we used. I do have to say that I do have a producer that I've worked with over the last 10 years, or less than 10 years, probably 8 years, who actually carries his carbon farm plan around with him. And he brings it everywhere to educate people on what he's doing, and also brings it into his business meetings for selling his eggs. So he's been able to learn a lot over the years, and it has benefited him substantially in his understanding as well. So this right here is a map. One of the things that we do with these carbon farm plans is we do map out every single thing for the producer on the landscape. And so you can just see how detailed some of the maps can be. And this one right here contains all the practices that this planner um, included in this carbon farm plan. But oftentimes planners will then also break these out by section or by system type. So then we can get a closer snapshot of exactly what is happening on that landscape. And then right here is just a table that correlates with what was mapped here. And then you can see annually if they were to implement everything recommended by this producer, they could sequester approximately 3,245 tons annually. And then in 20 years, that would equate to about 99,092 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. And then this next slide here is just another photo of a map that I created several years ago for a producer who also wanted to enhance their grazing systems. So before we wrote this plan, these producers only had 4 fields, actually 2 fields, 2 pastures, and we were able to help them think about installing fencing, permanent and temporary fencing, to really meet their goals and objectives of being able to move their animals, thinking about where water infrastructure could go for them. Also restoring the oak woodland that they already had on this property, and then really thinking about implementing other practices such as hedgerows, windbreaks, and restoring the riparian areas. So this is just showing you guys another map that where we were able to think about all those opportunities. And this slide here just shows us some of the co-benefits of increasing farm system carbon. And I think you guys probably already we've drilled this into your head. At least Jeff has mentioned this several times before, but really thinking about our farming systems and increasing carbon, we can increase our soil fertility, our production, improve water quality and quantity. We can really help with wildfire resilience through this management, increasing biodiversity and drought and flood resistance. Also, one thing with this grant is that we are committed to, I think, enhancing, what was it, not over, like almost 9,000 acres of habitat and biodiversity. So hoping that we'll be able to do a lot of restoration work and or like plantings of hedgerows and windbreaks, or tree shrub establishment in some of these areas. And that's across the whole grant, not specific to the Northern Great Plains. So this is the question that we get all the time, or what are the economic benefits? Does this pan out? One of the things is that a carbon farm plan is just a plan. So it is just helping you think about your farmscape or landscape differently. Doesn't mean you have to implement everything that is recommended in a carbon farm plan, but it will help you think about and identify where practice are applicable on your landscape. So some of those economic benefits is that carbon farm plans can help one, access price premiums through Fibershed or this Climate-Smart Commodity grant. And Rachel will get into that a little bit more. It can help you access funds throughout NRCS programs or various grant avenues out there, even philanthropy at times, and identify and implement impactful carbon farm practices to address on-farm resource concerns and opportunities. So once it's implemented, it can help reduce inputs and costs. We have seen this with several of our producers. It can help increase productivity and resilience. and really potentially increase the land value, reduce your crop insurance rate, access payments or carbon or other ecosystem services. As Jeff said, this is just maybe potentially setting folks up for a carbon farm or carbon market somewhat in the future. And then one of the other things, just thinking about these carbon farm plans, if a practice is new for you for implementation, we would never recommend that you would, maybe apply compost to your thousands of acres. We would want to start small and really work with you on being able to make sure that it is doable on your landscape before going bigger. So we really do work closely, producers and technical service providers, to make sure that we can implement successful projects on our landscapes. And that is all I have for you guys today. And I hope you guys have some questions for us. I know this is pretty high level, but we're here today to be able to answer questions, to talk to you, and allow you guys to get to know us a little bit more, and hear about, some of the work we've done. So should I stop sharing screen?
We can leave this up for a second. Do we have any questions?
Yeah. And if you don't have questions, we are more than happy to jump on a call with anybody at any time, or you can email us and we can answer questions through email too. I know it's a lot of information to take in, so.
Okay. Now we will introduce your Northern Great Plains technical assistance providers. So I'll hand the mic to Allison.
We have a question
Oh.
in the chat.
Can you read it for me?
Yeah, it's for Jeff and Lynette. The Comet tool is really handy for croplands and big management changes. How practical do you think it will be for quantifying grazing lands in the Great Plains?
Yeah, that's a great question. What we've seen in California is that the Comet Planner, we think, significantly underestimates the benefits of improved grazing practices. It's a blunt instrument, I guess I would say, for that purpose. We envision working with hopefully some local data in your region to try to come up with some better acreage per acre estimates for carbon sequestration. I know there's been some interesting work done out of University of Alberta, but I'm sure there's also even more local information that we can draw on to try to quantify that a little more accurately. Again, the Comet tools are great, but they tend to be very generic in their application, and particularly with respect to grazing, we've seen fairly consistent underestimates on what the benefits of improved grazing practices can be. So great question. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions? All right, so now I'll pass the mic to Allison.
All right, so now we're going to get a little bit into the Northern Great Plains region, and so we're going to introduce ourselves. I'm Allison Cooley, AG. I live in Big Timber. A little bit of background about me. I got my bachelor's at Montana State in sustainable food and bioenergy systems, and my focus was really on agroecology and soil health systems. I think my excitement about this project is really, I'm excited because I want to help producers get money and get out on the ground to make a difference in their own personal soil health. Alicia?
Hi, everyone. My name is Alicia Horak, and I am located centrally in South Dakota, just near Huron. My previous experience has been, I've worked with NRCS for the last 4 years, and I've got my bachelor's degree in natural resource management and my master's in applied ecology. And I'm just looking forward to continuing to work with farmers and ranchers out on the landscape. It's always great to see a good success story once everything comes to fruition.
My name's Danielle Dunai, and I need to, I've recently married, so I will change my last name to Proctor here soon. I have a master's in range management, and I have been managing the Montana State University sheep flock for the last couple of years. I'm really excited to continue to work with ranchers and get some dollars in your hands to hopefully make some improvements on your places, as well as looking into the premium markets for your wool and hopefully keeping more wool sheep on our rangelands.
We can go to the next slide. So our goals for the Northern Great Plains in this project is to enroll about 1.8 million managed acres, and we want to open premium markets for about 185,000 pounds of fine white wool in the next 4 years. And we want to have 40% of our producers be historically underserved or small. And we're looking to sequester about 2 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent. We can go on to the next slide. So you've probably seen this graphic before. This is just kind of the process that you go through when you're working with us. We start with enrollment, which practically everyone that's here today has been accepted already. And so you've gone through that stage. And then carbon farm planning, as Lynette and Jeff described to us, is the next step. And then after carbon farm planning, we get into practice implementation, where we can get those dollars into your hands using the NRCS specifications and standards to help you implement those practices on your landscape. Next slide, please. So we wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of our application process. So you can see at the top here, we've got like you fill out your application, and then it goes through our regional review, and then it goes through a national review, and then you get your acceptance email from Alona. So in our regional review, this is what we're looking at when we're scoring applications. We actually have a rubric that we just run your information through, and that's based on the total acreage you have under management, whether you're historically underserved or a small producer, your potential to produce fine white wool, and your potential for greenhouse gas reduction on your property. And then you can see down below, we have like shovel readiness, which is like, do you have the time and ability to work with us, and your ability to serve as like a demonstration site or ambassador. Next slide. So then we submit to national review, and that is our other teammates at NCAT. So that's Elise and Alona and Mike, the project director. And so they make sure to look through everything, make sure everything's squared away, that our rubric makes sense, that that your information makes sense on the application. And that's when Alona gets to send you the agreement and the other paperwork that's needed for acceptance. Next slide, please. So from you, what we need in acceptance is the signed contract, a completed W-9, and the FSA information release waiver. And so we need that FSA waiver just to get your subsidiary print in your farm producer data report, and also some mapping information from FSA if they have that data. So once we have this paperwork from you, then we can send you your first stipend payment of $1,000 to begin the carbon farm planning process. You can go next slide. So this, for the ranch plans, the carbon farm planning process, each planner is working with about 3 to 4 producers per year. So we can't get to everyone right away. But to begin your ranch plan, we're gonna, like Lynette described, we're gonna collect a bunch of site info, like your climate data, soil information, ecological sites, and then we'll come to your ranch to do a resource inventory and just collect some data, so we kind of know your operation and know what you have going on there. And then we'll also talk with you and kind of identify your short and long-term goals. So this inventory and analysis you can see circled here, this is what we need to have completed before we can move on to practice implementation.
So once we've done that on-site visit, as Allison alluded to, we start to then dive into decision-making. So when we start to look at this, we're going to look at your whole farm when we're doing our planning process, and then we're going to have an implementation plan also. All of this will be reviewed between your technical assistance provider and yourself. This is where you're going to choose what practices you would like to implement and what fields you would like that to be done on. So we use a lot of the NRCS practice standards. That's what we get to choose from. And once you're kind of narrowing down that decision making, we'll have you sign the conservation practice standard document, which then is saying that you agree to implement that practice per the NRCS standards and specs. And then if you're ever curious about, well, I don't know what I can do on my farm, I'm not sure what these practices are, what they mean, and what they all entail, this is a publicly available website. So I've posted the link here, and you could just go to Google and just type in NRCS Field Office Technical Guide, and this will pop up on Google for you. You can go to section 4 is where you're looking for these practices, and they're called the Conservation Practice Standards and Support Documents. So each state has their own, and they might be a little bit different in what they require. And so they're going to pop up all of the different practices that NRCS offers. Now, we don't necessarily offer all of those practices, so I just advise you to go ahead and talk with your technical assistance provider to see if that's something that our program can offer you assistance with. Once you get in there and you pick a practice, for example, I've listed cover crop here. Each practice will kind of go through and it'll tell you the different criteria. So what resource concerns does this practice address? What's the definition? What purpose does it serve? And then any considerations that you want to take when implementing this. For instance, cover crop can serve multiple purposes. It can help you to reduce erosion, help with compaction, or increase soil organic matter. And so there's usually a few different items that you should think about when we're looking to install these practices. It'll then outline what the plans and specifications are that we'll need to adhere to, and any operation and maintenance advice for you as well. So from there, once you figure out which practices that you think will work best for your operation, we need to complete those to NRCS practice specs and standards like we've alluded to before. So the producer then will implement that practice. So you'll go out and you'll plant this cover crop, for example, and then we're going to need you to submit the verification that yes, you did install it and you did it correctly. So for example, I've listed here the cover crop code, and it lists out the required documentation. So some examples is that we would need seed tags from you, which can just be a photo of the seed tag. And then we might also need some documentation showing that you had purchased the seed and what rate it was purchased at. So something just like a receipt from the local co-op, that'll work just fine. Once we've verified that we have all the information we need from you to have that practice successfully be implemented, NCAT will pay out the producer that cost share rate. And then we, as the technical assistance providers, will continue to monitor the progress and success of that for our USDA trend reporting. And then just so everyone else is aware in the background, what us technical assistance providers are doing is that we're also having to submit an environmental assessment to USDA. And some things that includes is any culture resource information. So if you're near a historical site or you have any Native American artifacts on your land, we do want to notate that and be aware that we can avoid some of those sites. And then we also look for threatened and endangered species and any habitat that we might be coming into contact with. So we're going to fill all of that out on your behalf. And we also fill out the field enrollment form. So what fields you decide that you would like to implement something on. And then the national team reviews that plan of what you're going to practice, and then looks at, make sure we have everything right in the budget. And once that gets approved, then you will sign the approved field enrollment contract with us. And lastly here, if you're curious on cost share payment schedules, this also is public information that you can sure Google or use the website provided. We do base our payments off of your local state's EQIP schedule. So you go to the NRCS website, look for payment schedules, and find your applicable state, and then it will break it out based on the different practices. So the cover crop in South Dakota may not pay the same as a cover crop in Montana or Wyoming.
And here's our contact information, which you all have already, but please feel free to contact us if you have any questions, or as we go, we'll begin to work together quite often. So with that, and our website will continue to stay updated, which is fiberpartnership.ncat.org. Do we have any questions before we move on to hearing about our markets? I'd like to introduce Rachel from Fibershed. She is our individual that's her full-time job is working on developing markets for the wool and the cotton. And so we're so glad to have her and appreciate her expertise that she brings to the team. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Danielle. And thank you everybody for hanging into this really long meeting. I have some exciting aspects of the program to talk about. So thanks for sticking in here with me. As the team mentioned, I am the brand engagement manager at Fibershed, pushing this work forward to get what we're calling climate beneficial fibers into the market and really rewarding producers for the work that they're doing as land stewards. So today I'll be sharing with you how Fibershed is working to build markets through verification and partnering with CCI and NCAT in the implementation phases. And we'll also look at, how this ranch planning process ties together with verification to really support your products in the market. And I'm going to go quickly today, but I would be more than happy to connect with anyone on the call afterwards to discuss this market development aspect further. So Fibershed is a nonprofit organization based in California that focuses on developing regional fiber systems that build ecosystem and community health. The concept of a fiber shed is similar to that of a watershed or a food shed. So the idea is that it's a geographical region that clothes you. So it's a geographical region that can produce, process, and manufacture clothing. And in that way, you can trace, a fiber all the way from the soil to, the clothing that you're wearing. So there's full transparency within the system. There's economic development in that geographical region. And there's also an aspect of, telling the story of each region's fiber, the qualities of that fiber, knowing your farmer, knowing where it came from. So it's really kind of building off of this whole movement for people wanting to know where their food comes from. This also applies to fiber, knowing where your fiber comes from and knowing where your clothing comes from. So Fibershed is, dedicated really to 3 programs that are, building regional textile systems. This has taken place, in California, but we have a worldwide network of affiliate fiber sheds that are working on developing their own bioregional systems. We've also focused on carbon farm planning with the support of CCI's team that presented today on helping farmers take a holistic farm planning approach and knowing how to plan for on-farm benefits and verify those benefits in a way where they can be rewarded with market premiums or other carbon markets. And then the end is also, educating consumers about why they should invest in fiber systems that they know and how can they support farmers who are doing the good farming and ranching work. So we're one of the partners in the Fibershed partnership. And I do have to say, we're really honored to be part of this team. We're honored to be, collaborating with the carbon farm planners and also all of the producers who are enrolling in this program. We come at this with a lot of respect for, all of the on-farm work. And really, we have a lot to learn from you. You all know your regional markets best. And so we really consider ourselves to be partners, researchers, and we hope to partner with everybody that's going to be involved in the program to figure out how we can best develop markets that tell the true story and value of the fibers that you produce. So Fibershed has been doing this work really in California for over 10 years. And a lot of that has been taking a systems and research-based approach to, this is an example of a study that was done in partnership with UC Davis in, mapping all fiber production within the state, understanding, what are the different micron counts and quantities and what could be different markets for those different fibers. Likewise, Fibershed has really dove deep into looking at US-based textile manufacturing systems and identifying the gaps within our domestic manufacturing systems. So washing centers, spinners, mills, looking at, we know, over the past 30 years, things have largely moved overseas. So how can we reinvest in our US-based manufacturing and processing systems in a way where we can really create bioregional fiber sheds? As I mentioned, Fibershed has affiliates all over the world, actually. They're, each individually managed in their own bioregions, but it's interesting to see how over the course of 10 years, there's 75 active Fibersheds across the world. So this is a concept that is kind of gaining steam, and it's really interesting to learn from what other groups are doing as well. So looking at markets, we know that the US wool market is really struggling right now and that prices are really low. And I think that, from the research that I've done, there's many factors, primarily, the pandemic and, having to do with production in China as well. Again, I would love to learn from you all and your experience and what you're seeing in the markets right now on a closer regional level. But what we're also seeing in general in the textile industry are a couple pressures that are moving, companies that use fiber to invest in eco fibers or sustainable fibers. And cotton and wool, the two fibers part of this program, are key fibers that are being kind of reinvigorated as sustainable fibers in the industry. So we can see, across the board, there's several research studies that have, projected that there's going to be significant growth for eco fibers. Another, significant pressure is the need for supply chain transparency. So, for companies who are making, especially clothing products, more and more, they need to know where the fibers that end up in their shirts, blankets, jackets, where it comes from. They're being asked to share where it comes from. They're being asked to report on where it comes from. And in many cases, they're buying, a fabric from a supplier, and they don't have visibility into where that wool was sourced from. So this is something that brands are receiving a lot of pressure, both internally and externally, from customers to deliver on. Another is just increasing regulations for brands to report the impact of the materials that they buy. So brands have to report, how much carbon dioxide was released from the fibers that you use in your products. And so, this program is enabling brands. This is a very attractive program for brands. It's enabling them to be able to report on very significant sustainability requirements, reporting requirements, and also goals. So there's a lot of different industry pressures that are, contributing to this eco-fiber movement, as well as brands wanting to stray away from synthetic fibers. There's a lot more market dynamics as well, but those are a few of the top ones that we're recognizing. So we're going to be touching on just briefly kind of what is the significance of carbon farm planning connected to a verification program, and I'll explain that more specifically, and markets. So, as we know, the Carbon Farm Plan is a key piece to the verification process that we use. And what the Carbon Farm Plan is doing is it's helping identify and then demonstrating a ranch's plan for improving their landscapes. In some cases, there are market partners, there are purchase buyers or brands who are really interested to know what's happening on the ground. And so in that case, the Carbon Farm Plan is a great tool to say, well, this is how I am approaching my land stewardship. This is how I'm, addressing, creating more resiliency in my landscape and improving soil health. And it also helps producers identify exactly how to maximize those carbon reductions for markets. So this is something that companies are extremely interested in. They have sustainability, departments dedicated to trying to track down and measure greenhouse gas emissions. And so, this program and the carbon farm planning process is helping you really maximize what it is you can do on farm in terms of carbon, and then how you can report that to brands. And the verification program is, you can think of it similar to other certifications or verification programs. You could think of USDA Organic as an example of a certification program that also has a product label. So the climate beneficial verification helps farmers measure what's happening on farm and report what's happening on farm to potential buyers. And then it gives the brands or whoever's buying the fiber a product label, and also the associated data that comes along with that. So whoever wants to do sustainability reporting or create marketing materials for the people who will buy their products, they have that really, really valuable resource that comes with the verification. So here you can see a photo of one of the farms that in Northern California, they did their carbon farm plan. They, through their carbon farm plan could estimate that they're sequestering around 4,000 metric tons of carbon annually. And the North Face partnered with them. And in this case, the North Face actually invested in composting facilities for the ranch. And they developed specific products that were, California grown, climate beneficial. They did a jacket and also a beanie. So to share a little bit more about what the verification is, we describe it as an on-farm verification program and product label that is designed to support fiber producers in communicating how the practices they use positively impact our planet. So what the verification does is it's, verifying that practices are implemented on the ground. And then it's also helping fiber producers report outcomes like the greenhouse gas emissions or improvements to soil health. And then those are communicated to the end buyers. The verification was developed in collaboration with the Carbon Cycle Institute and involved a lot of research, collaboration with producers, collaboration with technical service providers. And I will say, going back to the verification, the verification is something that is building on this fiber partnership that you have the opportunity to apply to. So this would be after you enroll in the program that you've heard about today. The verification is an additional step you can take if you want. It will have, it's designed to really align with the entire partnership program, but it will have some unique requirements as far as reporting for the verification, and it will have a unique application process. So I do want to clarify, it is an additional step you can take if you want. You don't have to, obviously, and it will have its own unique process, but it's designed to integrate, with this program. The value that the verification, when you have a verification, so you actually have a certificate of verification that goes along with your fiber, and that can move with it throughout the supply system. So the value that this has in the market is that you're able to say, I have verified greenhouse gas reductions that then buyers can claim, brands can claim. Brands can do the impact reporting for other aspects of on-farm ecosystems like soil, water, biodiversity. They're interested in those things as well. The verification enables the fiber that you produce to have full transparency. So there's a process for at every step of the supply system, it is traced through the supply system. And so that's something that, most fibers end up somewhere and they don't have a story to go with them. Your fiber is enabled to have full transparency back to the farm. Brands are able to do storytelling and also demonstrate, how they're leading in sustainability. So, we see this as really also delivering, the value back to producers is we're working very hard for this additional value that comes with the verification to establish premium prices in the market. And that premium price is 100% of it is directly returned to the producer. And we're also working very hard to establish direct sourcing partnerships and engage all supply system actors. I just looked at the time and noticed I have a really short amount of time. So I'm going to work hard to keep us on time, and excuse me if I'm going really fast here. But our approach is to engage the entire supply system. So we've got to be working with local aggregators, regional merchants, engaging brands, and developing ways for brands at the end who want to buy the fiber to recognize the value of the work that you're doing on the ground and invest in that. And I'm really excited because I believe that the Northern Great Plains has an incredible story and to tell in the marketplace about, the generations of people who have been stewarding the landscape, the role that sheep play in the landscape and can play in land regeneration, and the true value of investing in this unique and highly valuable regional ecosystem in the United States. And so we're really excited to work on developing that story in the market, promoting the verification. You can see some products that are already verified in the market here. There's several brands that have already been working with some climate beneficial fiber from California. And so, we could really consider ourselves a partner in this process. And as I mentioned before, I think, we're currently engaged in doing a lot of research into Northern Great Plains specifically, and identifying some key supply system actors and really coming in, wanting to learn more about systems, wanting to learn more how we can partner and uplift markets for wool. So I'll pause there, and I'll be sure to put my email in the chat. And I'm absolutely available to connect more on what the verification means and the market development piece.
Thank you, Rachel. We do have one question in the chat if you have time. What certification will be used as means of traceability?
Yeah. So the climate beneficial verification comes with a traceability process, which is a transaction certificate. So Fibershed in this case is the organization issuing the verification. And so I'm happy to share with you some examples of the verification certificate, as well as the transaction certificate. We can share those with you. But basically, the transaction certificate goes with the fiber. And so when it moves to a merchant or a buyer, they basically it's a paper trail. They report, I received this much fiber, I processed it in this way, I moved it here. We're not requiring that the supply system actors be certified specifically to a standard. We're considering, if they demonstrate that they have best industry practices for being able to handle fiber and maybe carry some other verifications, that is enough for our program. We're really trying not to make this difficult for anyone. And we're really happy to look at designing the program specifically for, working with regional handlers as well.
To honor our time, I think we'll leave it at that question and offer folks to reach out to Rachel specifically if they have any questions. Thank you to all of our presenters today, and I would like to plug that Jeff and Lynette will be visiting our area in June, and they hope to meet some of you and get out on your places and begin to look for areas that we can identify as practices. So if you're interested in having them come on, please contact your planner and we will get it set up. So with that, I'd call it an evening. Thank you to everyone, and we look forward to hearing from you. If you have any outstanding paperwork, this is a plug to please get it into us so we can move forward with the next steps. And you will hear from Allison, Alicia, and myself shortly. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.